many startups have done already today? Can you raise your hand who has lived in more than one city in your life? About 60%, I would say. Can I have a clicker as well? My name is Sten Tamkivi, and I'm the Chief Product Officer at Topia. And I'm going to talk to you today about human mobility, how people move around and why they do that and so forth. And I'm going to talk to you about that from 3 different angles. First of all, the individual. What are the choices that make individual humans to go to other places than the ones they were born in? Secondly, about companies, how startups and smaller enterprises and larger enterprises alike need to adapt to this sort of a changing landscape of increasingly mobile people. And thirdly, about what is the impact to the governments and states about all of that. But let me start with the individual. There are about 7.2 billion people in the world, and there are about 3.5 billion jobs. So roughly half of the people on this planet are working. But if you dig deeper into those jobs, there is like about 700 million of them that are in some way or form mobile. And people who do those jobs, are they software developers, graphic designers, business people, financiers, they have an opportunity of doing that in more than one country. Even if you're really, really good at agriculture and you speak a foreign language, you potentially can go to another place. So this is not specifically new, but there is something that we've been observing that is changing. And I would argue that there are 3 mega trends that are currently meeting. Why do people move around? First of all, what we see happening around the world is that your income is becoming increasingly global. So the way you can make money doing what you do and doing what you love is less and less related to the physical location where you're at. Think about the journalist who is stationed abroad and writes an article that is published back home, and all of a sudden they get paid, and it has nothing to do with where they are. Or think about the software developer who commits code into a repository, and so do 100 other people from different corners of the world, and all of a sudden, like magic happens, and I don't know, Linux is born. So you can create value, and you can receive part of that value without changing your location. At the same time, about 70% of cash that a typical human being sees in their lifetime is spent only on 2 things. Do you want to guess what these 2 things are? Housing. I'm hearing housing. That's one of them. What's the other thing? 70% of the cash you see in your lifetime goes into 2 things. What's number 2? Food is in the 30% part, but there's... Education? No. Transportation? No. No. It's taxes. So basically, the 2 biggest cost items in any human being's life are just a function of your X and Y coordinates on the planet. You tell me where you are on the planet, I can tell you where your money goes. Because housing costs are super local, and taxation is a direct function of the where you are on the planet. And now the third mega trend that is happening is mobility. And I think the interesting thing is that as technologists, we very often talk about mobility in a very limited terms. Like most people in technology, when they say mobility, they mean that mobile phones don't have cords, which we can see is not true. There's a battery pack still. But it's much more interesting to think about the mobility of humans, the way technology allows us to go to other places. And the typical anecdote I think about here is imagine a 24-year-old graphic designer. You get on an airplane, you open up your computer, you keep working for the same customer you were working for before boarding the plane, you're designing for the same project. You land in a city, you have a car waiting for you, you have a place to stay for the next week, and at that moment, you might not know what the name of the city is. Like imagine people 50 years ago, 100 years ago, just going abroad, going to another country and not even knowing where they are, but being able to sort of plug into the local community and get access to local housing and transportation and all these other things you guys were shouting out as the cost items. So overused, iPhone was 2007, so basically 11 years ago it was impossible to do those things. Now you can do all of those things just by using the mobile phone. And that's what I mean by mobility opening up the humans to move around, not just their devices. So if you put those three things together, what happens? There was a number before on stage that there are 4 billion plane tickets sold a year. So the friction of changing your location goes way down using technology spreading in our lives. At the same time, the benefit, if you're if you're a typical college graduate and you've studied something and you really want to improve your life the next week, the easiest way to do that is to change the location. You can go to a place where you have higher income for the thing that you do well, or you can go to a place where you have lower cost for your life. You can go to a place, it gets way more interesting when you have a family. Then you can go to a place where your kids get better education. Or you can go to a place where, I don't know, maybe you have a specific kind of lung issue and you want to live in a place with a cleaner air. So aggregating all of those sort of aspects of your life, people are increasingly moving around and they're changing their location. My co-founder at the company we founded 4 years ago called Teleport, Silver wrote a blog post that he took this premise as a data scientist that what if the act of birth is completely random? What if the next baby born tomorrow will be completely randomly chosen where that human is born? By the way, there's a 0.1% chance that that is Estonia, where I come from, so it's pretty special. But if you then look at certain criteria which we consider part of human life quality, for example, do you want to be born in a place which doesn't have armed conflict? Do you want to be born in a place which doesn't prohibit their citizens leaving the country? Do you want to be born in a place where you can choose what you do with your body? That there is nothing that the external forces do to you? Do you want to be born in a place where you have religious freedom? Do you want to be born in a place where you have low child mortality? Like all of those things. If you rank a certain set of those criteria and multiply the probabilities, there is about 3% chance that you're born in a place where you completely love your life. So with a 97% of probability, you will be born somewhere where not all the criteria will match what we today consider the sort of the normal human rights. So the question is that for an increasing set of people on the planet, it's like a matter of choice. Do you sort of stay with the lottery ticket you drew in this sort of cosmic lottery of where you were born, or do you actually figure out where do you go and what's the best place for you to do what you want to do and to live the life that you want to live? So that was the premise that 4 years ago when we started Teleport, we decided as a bunch of software people with a background from Skype and some other ventures around, at Skype we were kind of making the world smaller in a metaphorical sense, so we decided that, okay, why don't we make the world smaller in physical sense? Why don't we resort the people on the planet? And Teleport was a company where we created a search engine that you can go today, it's still live and has about 1 million people using it a year. You can go and search on Teleport, tell us who you are, what you want to do, and we'll tell you what would your life look like in different cities around the world. And so if you're a software developer and you want to make more money, or if you're a family person and you want to have better education for the kids, and we can calculate your match to about 800 cost and quality of life criteria in about 260 cities around the world, and show you this is your life in Istanbul versus this is your life in Amsterdam versus this is your life in Boston, and hey, you can't afford to live in San Francisco. And by creating that tool, we started observing what happens and how these people connect and how they form into organizations. So last year, Teleport was acquired by a company we now call Topia. And what we do at Topia is that we build software that powers very large companies around the world to manage their mobile workforce. So basically, companies as the organizing elements of how people build something together or build businesses or serve customers together. like the dynamics that the companies are seeing with this increasingly mobile workforce are also changing. And today, our software, we have about 110 corporate customers, and our software moves more than 10,000 people around the world a year, and we're seeing more and more data about how they behave. And so let me share a few of those things that we see with companies. First of all, very, very clearly, it has become earlier when companies go international. So already the teleport customers, the startups that we're working with, and teleport is a startup ourselves, we had our first 10 employees was based in like 6 countries, and 2 of them were full nomads. So 2 of our employees, one of my co-founders and one of the employees, were living in 5 or 6 countries a year. Basically, you can rotate the planet with the sun, and you want to be in places where you want to be, and you don't want to establish tax residency in places you don't want to establish tax residency, and so forth. By the time we had 200 people at Skype, we had 10 locations. So every week, as a manager at Skype, you had to think about, okay, should I hire this person in Prague or in Stockholm, or should I establish an office in some new city, or when we acquire this company, do we move these people around? And there are all these decisions that businesses need to make around location. And it gets even more complex with large companies. We now have customers who have 100,000 employees, and they come to us and say that we have 40,000 people on a visa. So companies need to worry that, okay, in our US office, there are all these people who have come in different points in time. We had nothing to do with the moves, but they all have these various times and dates when their visas expire and they need to leave, and it's a huge risk for our business if something happens. And if you read the papers and the current political events, occasionally these large companies need to figure out, that, okay, who in our staff is from Palestine? Like, help me understand where my people are, where they should be, and how do they get there? And that's exactly what our software does, and that is increasingly becoming a software problem, is making sure that all this complex information and data about cost of living and quality of life and what would your life look like, but also this compliance issues and taxes and immigration and all this myriad of variables need to come together for a company just do their basic business. So it's not like a luxury thing that you have a bunch of people traveling, but it's like in order to serve increasingly global customer base, you need to have an increasingly global company, and you have increasingly global complex problems that you need to sort out. When individuals have a good reason to move around, and they do move around, and when companies, for them it's inevitable that they will have their people move around the planet, what will happen? The next thing that I believe personally that is going to be massively impacted are the governments and the states. So I'm Estonian. I was born and raised in Estonia. I've lived in 4 countries. I've done business in several. For my last startup, I raised money from the US and several European investors and established a team in 6 countries and had it registered legally in 2 countries. And like this complexity is there. And now imagine that you're a tax board in that picture. Like, how do you figure that out? Estonia has an e-residency program. I don't know, who has heard of that? Very cool, thank you. So e-residency basically gives you an access to another nation state's, Estonia's government system, so that you can establish a company, use the bank accounts, and do all this sort of tax reporting and all these things without ever visiting Estonia. It's basically the premise. And now imagine a use case of that e-residency. Imagine that there is a Ukrainian artist who paints a painting, let's say a pigeon. Paints a pigeon and sells that painting for 10,000 euros to an art buyer in Germany. And the invoice goes out from Estonian e-resident entity. So a Ukrainian dealing with a German, and now all of a sudden an Estonian entity bills. Where was value created? Which government can get which taxes? Is there a sales tax? I don't know. Or think even more complex. One big issue that I've heard from young entrepreneurs from emerging markets is that if you want to build a mobile app and make money, Apple and Google might not pay out to your country. So let's say you're born in Bangladesh and you have a fantastic idea for a mobile game that you can sell for $4 a piece, and you sell it to 1 million customers. So you make $4 million, 30% goes to Apple or Google, and 70% is supposed to come to you. But guess what? Your country is the limit why you can't get access to that. So let's say a Bangladeshi game developer establishes an Estonian entity, has an American company collect money from 100,000 users from 80 countries and wants to pay it out to you. Who gets the taxes? I don't know. So basically, these are just examples how the model which we built, this sort of Westphalian country system, where you have these sort of sovereign entities who control their physical territory, and then you have all of a sudden this sort of communities happening in the cloud and businesses happening in the cloud that completely defy those borders and do their businesses the way they want to do, and people who live their lives how they want to do. I don't think our current world is compatible with that, and we haven't solved by far all of those problems. There are only the first few countries like Estonia or Singapore, or typically it seems to be the smaller countries have an advantage of starting to move quicker in that, who are trying to figure out, okay, what does the business law look like in that situation? What does immigration look like in that situation, and so forth. But it's by far not sorted out yet. My objective of coming to Istanbul today was to share some of those thoughts that I've seen building a set of software companies already now, and what we're now building at Topia to use software to power this sort of revolution of people living and working wherever they want to do that in the world. And my goal here is to sort of encourage you to not to constrain yourselves. I've heard so many startup pitches from different countries today that don't think in the constraints of your own country, and being here in Istanbul and going out to where your customers are, where your potential investors are, where the best talent is that you can work with. This is the absolutely normal thing to do, and you should never hesitate of thinking about sort of your location very, very consciously as one of the items that you have in your toolbox. And obviously, once your companies really grow and you have the next 20,000 people that you need to figure out where they are, then feel free to let me know and we can help you. Thank you.